All right, so I'm gonna do, I think maybe one or two examples on the calculator. I'll probably pick one from your homework, right? So maybe one or two from your homework. So I'm gonna first look at number 6 on the homework, right? So there should be an assignment called, I think it's just called homework chapter 4.2. Right, so I'm gonna look at number 6 for that one. Right, so first we went over to actually graph something. You're going to hit this y equals button, right? Y equals. A lot of the calculators, you can just hit alpha and then the variable button right next to it, and then you get a fraction bar. And you can kind of toggle up and down between the two, right? Some people, I think on some different types of calculators and some older models, you don't have that option to get a little fraction. So what you would do instead is you would just do parentheses divided by parentheses, right? And then in the parentheses would go whatever's on the top, and then close the parentheses, divide whatever's on the bottom, and then you get the same thing, right? But I'm just going to do it this way. So I'm going to hit alpha and then the variable button, and then you should see two boxes right on top is going to be 2x squared plus 3. And then on the bottom is going to be x minus 4. And then you're going to go to hit graph. All right, so this is assuming that you did everything already, right? You found your vertical asymptotes, you found the slant asymptote, right? This one's going to have slant. You found your intercepts, and you kind of already graphed all those. Like you already did a rough sketch by this point, hopefully, right? And then you see something like this, right? So this should raise some concern already, just because you only have one of your little boomerang shapes, right? Typically, we see two. And if we have two vertical asymptotes, typically we'll have two boomerangs on the outside and then like maybe a squiggle in the middle or maybe like a U shape in the middle, right? But we only see one part of it, right? This is fine for that portion of it, but that's probably some indication to you that there's going to be another little boomerang shape floating somewhere in space, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to zoom out. So I'm going to click the middle zoom button and then hit 3, zoom out. You'll see that it hasn't zoomed out yet, but you should see a little blinking star. That means that you have to do something in your calculator for it to zoom out. And where the blinking dot is, it's where it's going to center the zoom out. All right, so if you want, let's just say I'm going to move it up a little bit. Right, so I'm going to hold it and then hold it. I want to know what's happening over there, right? So I'm going to zoom out over there and then I'll hit enter. And then you see that there is another little boomerang shape, right? It's going way up there. All right. And then to figure out some points to plot in that little shape, as always, you're going to do second graph and then you're going to find a table of values, right? It looks like here it's fractions. I think for some of you, your calculator showed decimals. But in any case, right, you see something like 5 comma 53 is a point that you would plot on your graph, right? And then scroll down a little bit, right? For example, 933 is one that you would plot on your graph, right? Or maybe like 10, 203 over 6, right? It doesn't really matter. You just need a couple to get the rough idea. I just need to see that you're plotting a couple points on your graph and that you have the correct shape, right? Your calculator doesn't show the asymptotes, right? But there's going to be a slant one right here, and you would write that equation and you would draw like a little dotted line. And then there would be the vertical one that you would also draw a little dotted line, right? Those are not optional. You need to have those on your graph. All right, so that's one example. I'm going to try to pick one that has a hole, right? So I think number 7 on that same homework assignment. Um, let's try that, right? So I'm going to clear this. I'll show you if you don't use that alpha button. Like let's say yours is a type of calculator that doesn't have that. I would just put in parentheses whatever's on top, right? So I'm looking at number 7 on the homework. It's going to be x plus 2, close your parentheses, and then you're going to divide, and then have another set of parentheses, x squared minus 4, right? And it's going to be something like that, right? You're always going to do the original before canceling it out, just because when you look at your table of values, you're not going to see where the error is right? So this one is going to give you um, two errors when you hit the table of values. But if you graphed the simplified one, right, I think here x plus 2 cancels out. And then you're going to be left with 1 over x minus 2, right? Then you're not going to account for um, that value, right? So then I'm going to hit graph. And then notice that I'm zoomed out already. If you want to zoom back in, just click the zoom button and then hit the number 2 where it says zoom in. And then again, you can center it wherever. I kind of want to go back to the center, right? So let me just move the little star over towards more towards the center, right? And you can see the X and Y coordinates at the bottom, right? It's not quite at 0, 0, but it's pretty close. So I'm going to click enter. And then you can see that we're zoomed in and then we get a better idea of what our graph looks like. So you would graph this, but keep in mind you do have a hole that you would have mathematically found, right? You would have found that by hand, right? That's not something that this graph gives you, right? You don't really see that. But if I do second graph and I go to the table of values and I keep going up, see, like here it's giving me decimals, right? I'm not sure why it's giving me decimals here, and then it gave me fractions in the other one, but in any case, right, you would just pick a couple values, but then you see at 2 it gives you an error, and then when you go up at -2 it gives you an error, right? At -2 that was a hole, right? If I go on my graph, I hit the graph button, at -2 there isn't an asymptote there, right? There's an asymptote at +2, but there's not an asymptote at -2. Right? So that should be on your guys' paper. You guys need to write a big open circle just so that we can clearly see that there is a hole there, right? Your calculator is not going to show it. I think even if you zoom in, right? Let's just say I want to zoom in. I want to see what happens closer to that point, right? So I'm going to go to approximately where x is -2, and then I'm going to hit enter. And then you see, right, there's still nothing, right? There's not even an open circle there, right? So no way for you guys to have seen that just with the calculator. You have to have solved for it, and then on your graph again, you would draw the open circle there. All right. But that's the gist of it. That's how you would graph using your graphing calculator, right? So kind of short, just a couple examples. It shouldn't be anything too crazy. Majority of the test, or I'm sorry, majority of the quiz is going to be done by hands, right? You don't really need your calculator for majority of it. You mainly need it just to find the graph in a table of values. All right, but otherwise, that's it.